By many players, Pyanodons, or short Pi, is considered the most complex overhaul mod pack for Factorio. The goal is simple, but not easy. Similar to vanilla Factorio, you progress through the tech tree, from one science pack to the next. You will launch rockets somewhere near the end. But that is just a step like many others. To officially win, you need to research a specific technology at the end of the tech tree. Here's the catch. Pi has a gigantic tech tree, a huge amount of items and fluids, many different production buildings, and some unique mechanics. Most players give up or just stop somewhere along the way, and the few who finish need several hundred hours for it. You have probably heard things about Pi like grindy start, very long burner phase, just complex for complexity's sake, or no trains or bots for the first couple hundred hours. But these statements are not entirely true. This mod pack is definitely not for everyone, but many of those who are brave enough to give it a try do have a lot of fun, even though they never finish it. I want to give you an idea about why Pi is so difficult and encourage you to give it a try nevertheless. First of all, it is important to talk about some individual mods in the mod pack. Pi code processing started it all many years ago, and it still is the cornerstone of the mod pack. Over time, additional mods were added that concentrate on specific areas. For example, Pi raw ores significantly changes how to process ores into plates, and Pi high tech significantly increases complexity of making circuit boards. Pi Alien Life introduces a plethora of fictitious plants and animals that you need to genetically engineer at first. And the latest edition, Pi Alternative Energy, completely changes the role and progression of energy. These mods build on top of each other. The developers made some suggestions for playing with only a subset of these mods, but you will only get the full Pi experience by using all of them. For the full experience, just install Pi Alternative Energy, and all other mods are added as a dependency automatically. Nowadays, playing Pi or playing Pi Alternative Energy means to play the full mod pack in its current version. In contrast, playing Pi Alien Life normally means playing the older version from before the release of Alternative Energy. Back then, you could install Pi Alien Life, and just like now, all other mods of that time were added as a dependency. Some of the misconceptions about Pi have been true in previous versions. However, with the release of Pi Alternative Energy, all other mods received a lot of balancing and polishing as well. The developers did a marvelous job, assisted by a lot of feedback in the long beta phase. Today, you will have a much better experience than ever before, in case you want to give it a try. But beware, many of the tips from back then are simply outdated. So what exactly is so complex in Pi? Let me give you my own personal analysis of the mod pack. Pi is long. There are 4 more science packs than in vanilla. The tech tree spans almost 1,000 technologies, and most of these technologies contain buildings and recipes that are required to progress. The sheer amount of items, fluids, recipes, buildings, technologies, of everything requires you to invest several hundred hours into a playthrough until you can declare victory. Is it important to finish the game? Not if you have fun, in my opinion. Playing Pi is about the journey, not the destination. And is length even the same as complexity? I don't know. And to be honest, I don't care. Pi uses complex game mechanics right from the very beginning. Vanilla Factorio has a learning curve that is friendly to new players. In the beginning, most recipes are really simple. A few items in and a single item out. Besides water, you won't encounter fluids until making your third science pack. And you can use basic oil processing for a while. Quick jump to Pi. Even before manually crafting your first science pack, you will encounter some issues. Your burner mining drills and stone furnaces eat fuel so quickly that you want to have some automation going on. But belts and inserters are so expensive and take so long to craft by hand. And you will see ash piling up in your machines. You don't know what to do with it. And luckily, that's not an issue for some time due to its high stack size. Stone gives you a neat puzzle to solve. You can't just mine stone. You can only mine it together with kerogen. You can use kerogen as fuel, but it has a very low fuel value, and it seems there is no other use for it. Automation, one of the first technologies to research, finally allows you to automate. But then you realize that your only assembling machine burns fuel instead of running on electricity. And a little bit later you realize that ash has become an issue you somehow have to deal with. And then you're wondering why you can't select any recipe in this assembling machine that needs more than 3 solid inputs. Coal processing, one of the first technologies for real progress, gives you access to a process converting raw coal into coal and further into coke. And then you realize that you can't fit enough inserters onto a single side of the huge building to keep it running. And you need to do something with the iron oxide. Of course, you convert it into iron plates, but how should you integrate it into your iron belt without splitters? And what should you even do with tar and coal gas? And what even did you need the coke for in the first place? Processing raw coal into coal and coke actually reduces its total fuel value. So using it to power your steam engines doesn't look like the best move. Soon after, you use the coke for steel plates, the coal gas for mining aluminium ore, and the tar to power your glass works. But how should you keep it all running? All the products are interconnected, and when one of them backs up, your whole factory stands still. And you don't have splitters or overflow valves yet. And soon, somehow, your starter base already looks more complex than a vanilla megabase. This is not an easy start. Pi throws you in at the deep end. By denying you tools like splitters in the early game, Pi forces you to solve puzzles that you already know in a different way. The puzzles become fresh, but more difficult to solve, with the obvious solution no longer being available. Pi has complex recipes. Most recipes in Pi have several ingredients. Many recipes have more than one product. I highly recommend you to use a mod or external tool to navigate all the recipes, items and fluids, and to calculate ratios for builds. But what's wrong with multiple products? That's simple to explain. When one product is backed up, the other products are no longer being produced as well. Pi allows you to void basically all items and fluids, so why should you not simply void the byproducts? Do you remember the coal processing technology? It's not always so easy to tell byproducts and main products apart. Even if something is clearly just a byproduct, sometimes it's the only way to make it. Sometimes it's still valuable, maybe too valuable to avoid. Not only are single recipes complex, whole recipe chains are even more complex. Especially with later ore processing, many of the products must be looped back into earlier steps for further refinement. Some systems feature closed loops that you just have to fill initially. Other loops leak a small percentage that you have to refill consistently. Even other loops might span a large part of your factory. Often, you will only recognize these loops after your factory came to a standstill and you are investigating the situation. Some systems play with your luck, like the queen bee, which is expensive to make due to its 1% chance to make it. Even worse, there is a little chance to lose it in another step. How should you deal with this? A long belt full of expensive queens sounds like a waste of resources to me. There is no single way in Pi. Many products can be made in different ways. Often, there is not an obvious best way. Even recipes or buildings that look like an upgrade at first come with their own downsides. You need to make decisions, meaningful decisions, that depend on how you prioritize certain aspects. Your current tech level, your playstyle, your factory design, your current production statistics, your map settings, additional mods you use, and in addition to that, your personal preferences. Some recipes that look like an upgrade are even kind of traps that you should not switch to right away. By the way, you should also take any advice from myself with a grain of salt. For example, you get access to better iron ore processing rather early. That improves your autoplate ratio a bit, but you need to craft a considerable amount of expensive buildings and they need quite a lot of power for the early game. You're basically trading iron ore usage to raw coal usage plus ash handling plus increased footprint. You could simply skip the upgrade until you have better ways to make power. Pi infrastructure is expensive. In the beginning, belts and inserters feel expensive. Later on, many other buildings feel expensive and the time you unlock them. Even splitters feel kind of expensive when you finally make your first simple circuit boards. It is one thing to build a factory that produces a certain amount of science packs per minute, but it is a completely different thing to build the factory that builds the factory. Unlike in vanilla, where you can simply siphon some resources of your science production into your mall, building infrastructure in Pi is a different beast. It starts with the fact that you can't build a mall in the beginning. You can only automate intermediate parts, because most buildings themselves need too many solid inputs for the burner assembling machines. When you finally have access to automated factories, you could build a mall that produces all the buildings for you. You just need to route 1,000 belts or use sushi techniques. By the way, combinators are still a bit further down in the tech tree. When you have access to logistic bots, a mall seems to be the most obvious next step, until you realize the huge footprint you need for it. And when the mall starts to run, it will consume all your resources for several hours until all its buffers have filled up. To progress, you need quite a few extra resources just for your infrastructure, like the aluminium plates that you make very early and don't consume for science production until much later. Under such circumstances, it's very difficult to even set a production goal, because science packs per minute only tells you half the story. Pi has a large variety in numbers. Pi has both items and fluids in many variations. There are items you consume multiple full belts of, even early. And there are items where it hurts, when a belt buffer contains even a few items. Stack sizes of items are in a wide range, going up to 1,000. Large stack sizes can be both a curse or a blessing. The situation looks similar for fluids. For proper handling of some high throughput fluids, it helps to know the game's fluid mechanics inside out. On the other end of the spectrum are fluids that you might even try to salvage when deconstructing and rebuilding, because you only make and consume a few drops of it. Fluids that are simply expensive. Some builds will be huge, either by number of total buildings or number of different steps, or both. Other builds will be small, maybe even just a single building. Some builds need very little different inputs, maybe even none at all, while others need more than you like. Some products are produced in a single place. Others are byproducts that are made all over your factory. Likewise, some products are only used in a single place. Others are used all over the place. And always keep in mind that all of these numbers are not constant and might shift in significant ways when reaching new technology levels and other milestones. This vast variety means that there is not a single best way to play Pi, but it also means that your factory design might work for most parts of the game, while being horrendously inefficient for other parts. Pi is different. There is only a very limited set of knowledge that you can carry over from playing vanilla and other overhaul mods. It does help to know how the game mechanics work, and I mean in a detailed way. How do you split a belt with only inserters? How do you sort a mixed belt with filter inserters? How do you separate a single belt lane using undergrounds? How do you combine two belts? When doing so, how do you prioritize belts or lanes? How to prioritize belts or lanes when splitting or inserting into buildings? How do fluids flow? How to prioritize some fluid consumers or producers over others with only pipes? How can you calculate input and output of buildings, the required number of inserters, belts, buildings, and so on? It is very easy to finish vanilla Factorio without even knowing how these questions might be relevant. And many other overhaul mods require you to solve different problems, like scaling up. Some knowledge does even hinder you. You should forget everything you know about your beloved steam engine build for power. Forget your smelting designs. Forget how you are accustomed to numbers and scaling up. Even forget what you know about inserters and assembling machines. Forget what you know about infinity of space. If any of the following questions regularly pops into your head, you're in for a treat. Is 1 science per second enough, or should I make more? What products should I put on the main bus? Or even worse, how many belts of iron plates should I put on the main bus? How many mining drills do I need for a full belt of ore? How many buildings do I need for a full belt of output? How many buildings do I need to consume a full belt of input? How many buildings do I need for a perfect ratio? How many times do I need to copy this build to solve my bottleneck? Can I reuse my city block blueprints that served me well so far? Should I use 1-4 or 2-8 trains? Should I build 4 tracks of rail from the start? In contrast, Pi encourages you to ask a different kind of question. How large can I build before it becomes unwieldy? How many resources and how much of my playtime do I want to invest into a specific build? Are there products that I don't want to automate at all? What even is my factory's current bottleneck? Is it worth improving my factory's current bottleneck right now? How can I research my way out of the current bottleneck? How can I make important parts of my factory run reliably? How should I split all the different buildings and recipes into separate builds? What products are worth to buffer and which should just back up? How can I make a small but continuous amount of products? And how do I make sure that these products are effectively routed to its intended destinations? How should I lay out my factory now? How will this need to change later? What can I do now to facilitate a smooth transition in the future? Mistakes in Pi are costly. Beware of the deadly spiral of overbuilding. If you build too big, you're going to need more resources for buildings. That requires you to build even bigger. You need to cover larger distances, requiring more belts and pipes, costing precious resources. That requires you to build even bigger. That takes more time, so all your ash chests are filling up in the meantime. You need to sort ash in solid separators. That requires more buildings, so you need to build even bigger. And you're going to need more power, so you build more of the inefficient steam power you get by burning raw coal. But that makes more ash, so you need to build your ash separation even bigger. Your resource patches are running out too fast, and you need to exploit resources from farther away. So you need more belts and pipes again. That requires you to build even bigger. Your factory grows to a point where it's too tedious to hand feed anything by chest. So you need more time and resources to automate everything. That requires you to build even bigger. You realize that your factory is so big that you need floor tiles to improve your walking speed, costing more resources. That requires you to build even bigger. You need to craft so many buildings by hand that you decide to build the best mall you can currently make. Not only does this consume your playtime, but building up the mall's internal buffer also drains all important resources from your factory. You simply need more of everything. That requires you to build even bigger. And when you finally produce the next science pack, you can basically rebuild everything, because now you have access to better recipes. Not to mention that you can research all available technologies in the blink of an eye, but you need much more time to actually make all the builds to produce the science pack after that. Even reaching smaller milestones often makes part of your factory obsolete. Don't get me wrong, this playstyle can actually be a lot of fun to some players. And what's wrong with having fun? But often the players caught in the deadly spiral of overbuilding complain about Pi, locking splitters, trains or logistic bots too deep down in the tech tree, and that it takes too much time to reach them. My interpretation is that Pi encourages you to build small by locking splitters, a proper mall, construction bots and trains down the tech tree. But most players don't understand that broad hint, want to scale up early, and then complain about Pi not giving them the tools they need to play the game as if it were vanilla Factorio. But can you, as a new player, prevent the deadly spiral of overbuilding? In your first game of Pi, you will, with a high probability, make mistakes. You will run into dead ends. You will take detours. You will want to try out all the toys you are given, even if they are not strictly necessary or even worse than alternatives. You are going to need more time in total. Even if there is no single best path, yours is probably worse than all of them. All of these small little extras add up. You need more resources and build bigger. And at some point, you have entered the deadly spiral of overbuilding without realizing it. When playing an unfamiliar overhaul mod, it's not an easy task to realize you even have a problem, correctly assess your situation, and get yourself back on track. In vanilla Factorio, you can't really mess up. Building too big doesn't really matter, because the buildings didn't cost much, and you're going to need them soon anyway. But in Pi, that's a different story. When you waste the simple circuit board production of the last 2 hours on buildings that you don't really need, you have just lost those 2 hours. But now you're out of simple circuit boards, and if you decide to scale up your production as a consequence, you have lost another 10 hours or more. You simply didn't make any meaningful progress during that time. And there is another reason why overbuilding in Pi is so common. Other mods. Many players have a preferred set of quality of life mods that they have collected over time. Because of vanilla megabases and many other overhaul mods, this often includes nanobots, companion drones, or a quick start mod with personal construction bots. If players actually needed to build everything by hand, they'd probably think twice before overbuilding. In Pi, you get access to personal construction bots way before you actually need to scale up your production. Of course, you are free to use whatever mods you like, and I'm not saying that quality of life mods can't improve your experience playing Pi, but some mods encourage you to overbuild, and you should not give in to that temptation. Just because you have the tools to build big doesn't mean that you should do it. Okay, you got it. I've said enough. Pi takes an absurd amount of time to play and is more complex and frustrating than any other Factorio overhaul mod out there. So why should you still give it a try? The question should be, why not? How do you know that it's not for you if you don't try it? Every person is different, and you may love playing Pi or you might hate it. I can just tell you why I enjoy playing Pi, and maybe you can somehow relate to that. Playing Pi is like my first game of Factorio, just longer. There is so much new content, so much to discover. I'm facing so many new problems and can come up with innovative solutions. And it's so satisfying to see my crappy factory limp along. It is fun. Forget main bus, forget city blocks. Spaghetti is the most fun way to play Factorio for me. Unfortunately, after gaining some experience in Factorio, I unlearned how to cook my pasta properly. But when playing Pi, I seem to remember my newbie skills. I still transition to city blocks as soon as possible, but I just love the early game in Pi. I like difficult challenges. Right now, I'm challenged by a community member on Discord to set a new speed record for reaching complex circuit boards, the equivalent of red chips in vanilla. Will I succeed? I don't know. It looks good so far, but there is a real chance of burning out before reaching the goal. I feel an enormous sense of achievement. even for things I always took for granted. After unlocking simple circuit boards, I was finally able to build splitters, and it felt so good, even though I got accustomed to my inserter abominations in the meantime. Building my first train felt like my birthday. Building personal construction bots? I just won the lottery. Unlocking logistic bots? I'm the ruler of this world. Cliff explosives? Oh my god, my feelings are difficult to describe. Similarly, using better recipes feels just so good. For example, upgrading steel plate production to using molten metals and seeing my production skyrocket is so much more satisfying than just copy-pasting my steel smelter 10 times in vanilla. When playing Pi, I have to take meaningful strategic decisions. I know that I will face the consequences for the next few hours, maybe even for the rest of the game. And making the wrong decision will hurt. In vanilla Factorio, the strategy is simple, and there are no real alternatives. Build towards the next science pack. If I have to wait, build more. Always increase production of my current bottleneck. In the megabase phase, switch to solar power. Build a production of modules and rebuild everything using beacons. Some other overhaul mods don't feel that much different. But not so in Pi. One of the first examples of an important decision is how to handle the ash. I can see so many options. Use wooden fuels that don't produce ash in the first place. Store ash in chests and leave it as a problem for future me. I could even leave the ash in the buildings until they lock up, or rely on future me to remove the ash manually from time to time. Build a bunch of solid separators. Convert everything to usable products. Or build a bunch of solid separators and store soot and iron oxide for later, when they become more valuable. Void the ash using burners. Use ash in wood production. Or any combination of those options. This is just a single decision, and still it has a huge impact on the design of my whole factory. If my factory runs smoothly, I can be proud of the decisions I made. If it doesn't, I'm the one to blame, and I can have more fun in fixing my mistakes. Pi bases look so extremely different from each other. I just like to see how other players approach the same problems and how they evaluate their options. I can learn so much about the game by having other players look at it from a different angle and share their experience. The developers of Pi were even so bold to give you exclusive upgrade options. You can choose between several options that change existing recipes, add new ones, or add module effects using hidden beacons. And you can't reset these options until so late in the game that you have basically already won. That makes Pi bases even more different from each other, and recipes that you thought to be irrelevant can shine under certain circumstances. Hopefully, I could give you a good overview of the spirit of Pi and the mindset you need to enjoy it. Give it a try and set yourself a goal, like making your first simple circuit board. Also, take a look at the guide I have written for new players. A link is down in the description. And don't forget to join the Discord, especially when you're stuck and need help, but also when you want to share your joy when finally making your first splitter after a few hours.